President Trump visited Atlanta on Wednesday to tout his administration's new infrastructure and environmental policies. The trip comes as one new poll shows the president's approval rate falling and Joe Biden's general election lead over him climbing. Natalie Brand is at the White House.
Everybody, thank you.
The Trump administration moved forward Wednesday to weaken the 50-year-old National Environmental Policy Act, which mandates environmental reviews of major federal infrastructure projects, from freeways to pipelines. President Trump argues the regulations have blocked or delayed important infrastructure projects.
We're cutting the federal permitting timeline for a major project from up to 20 years or more, hard to believe, down to 2 years or less.
Pro-business groups support the move, but environmentalists call it a giveaway to polluters.
The president's visit to the battleground state of Georgia comes as presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden unveiled his plan this week for a clean energy future.
When Donald Trump thinks about climate change, the only word he can muster is hoax. When I think about climate change, the word I think of is jobs.
The former vice president's 14-page proposal intends to create millions of jobs in the auto industry and through government-backed construction projects. Biden also calls for a carbon-free power sector in 15 years.
The Trump administration and the Biden proposal follow two completely different tracks.
Professor of environmental law Robert Glicksman of the George Washington University says historically the two parties have opposing views of environmental protection's impact on the economy.
In general, the Democrats are more concerned with environmental protection considerations than the Republican Party has been.
The Trump administration's move Wednesday is expected to draw legal challenges from environmental groups.
And Natalie Brand joins us now from the White House. Natalie, good to see you. The White House unveiled several new policies on Wednesday, including the environmental rollbacks that you mentioned, as well as a new infrastructure policy. Can you tell us more about the focus on these issues now, and is this part of an election promise that the president feels like he needs to maintain?
Well, Lana, we've seen both the president and the presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden this week focus on jobs and on the environment and the intersection of the two. The president and administration touting changes to NEPA, the National Protection Environmental Act, which they say will streamline the 50-year-old law, cut red tape, and help spur infrastructure projects in growth in some key areas with key federal projects, visiting a 2020 battleground state to make that pitch. And then just yesterday, we heard from his Democratic rival about this clean energy plan to build jobs around a new clean energy job market and infrastructure program on the Democratic side. So both key themes, but some significant differences and policy approaches between the two that really reflect as well the historical differences between Republicans and Democrats on this topic. That environmental law professor I spoke to pointed out that past Republican administrations and the current one view some of these environmental protections as detrimental to the economy. They've called for cutting regulation, whereas that's not a conflict seen by previous Democratic administrations or Democratic lawmakers who believe that the two can coexist, both environmental protection and economic growth. And that's the message we heard from Biden yesterday, whereas the president taking aim at that message and Biden himself. This is going to continue to play out in the months ahead.
Well, and Natalie, the event in Atlanta was an official White House event, but like Tuesday's address from the Rose Garden, the president really went after his Democratic competitor in the upcoming election. Can you remind us, Natalie, what are the rules about campaigning during official White House events, and is the White House at all concerned about this?
Yeah, well, I asked the White House communications team, and a spokesman told me the president should be able to address the American people on any topic from any location, and emphasize that the president is not subject to the Hatch Act. Now, that law does place restrictions on federal employees from engaging in partisan political activities. But he's right, the president is not subject to that law. However, employees of the executive branch and staffers are, so they are very careful to steer clear from politics when writing, say, official speeches, of course, and these speeches are supposed to go through the White House counsel office, and previous administrations have really scrutinized this issue and have been overly careful to avoid the optics of any sort of blurred lines between the official side and the campaign side. This administration, or really the president, has taken a different approach that a lot of analysts and reporters have noted, and blurred the lines in a way that previous administrations have not. The president using his power and bully pulpit in a way that we have not seen before. And again, he's come from the private sector, not traditional politics. So it is interesting when you compare these actions to previous administrations. But, you know, this is going to only continue to ramp up in the months ahead as we've seen him travel to key states, key battleground states, and try to tout his message in any way he can ahead of election season.
Yeah. So, Natalie, let's go ahead and dig into that a little bit more. A new national poll from Quinnipiac University shows that Joe Biden is leading President Trump by 15 points, and the president's approval rating has also dropped to 36%, even though we all know that national polls don't really determine elections. How are Republicans and the president's allies reacting to Trump's slipping poll numbers?
Well, the vice president, in a call with reporters today, said the only poll that matters is on election day, which is a typical refrain you hear from politicians. But we know that privately, some Republican allies are concerned. While the president's campaign team and campaign officials have tried to point to faulty or rigged polls, again, we know that privately, there is concern, especially when you scrutinize polls in individual battleground states and the handful of states that will be so key to determining the outcome of this election when you look at the Electoral College. And what's also really interesting to watch, and we'll have to continue to watch this, is the Republican senators in competitive races in some of these battleground or swing states. Do they begin to distance themselves from the president and the administration? We'll be watching their ads and their messaging and their campaign events to try to get a sense of how these individual Republican senators in key states feel.